This is for the purple group doing lesson 75. You will need to start with your textbook, so have your textbook open and ready to lesson 75 and we'll get started. So starting in the textbook for part 1 for lesson 75, let's read what it says in the box and follow along. When you multiply dollar amounts by whole number, the answer will always have 2 places after the decimal point. So we know that when we are working with money, we always have a decimal point and then 2 numbers. After you multiply, you start with the ones digit of the answer and count off 2 places for the decimal point. Also make sure the answer has a dollar sign. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to ignore the decimal point when I multiply, and I just go ahead and I multiply it just like I always do. And then once I get down here for the answer, I'm going to start pretending my decimal point's here. I'm going to count 1, 2, and I go 2 spots and place my decimal point. So this isn't even just for money. Like anytime when we're taking our time test or anything like that, anytime you multiply by a decimal, if there's 1, 2 places for the decimal, your answer should have 1, 2 places for the decimal. So let's do part 2. We'll do problem A together. Okay, so here's part 2. So let's do A. When I'm looking here, I'm just going to remember ignore the decimal point for right now. And I'm just going to multiply like I normally do. So I've got 0 times 3. So 0 times 3 is 0. I've got, the next one is 3 times 2, which is 6. And then the next one I have is 3 times 7, which is 21. All right, so what I remember here is that I've got 1, 2 places to the decimal for dollar sign. So my answer needs to have 1, 2 places. So my decimal point's going to go right here, right? 1, 2 places. So I'm going to put my decimal point right here. And then because it started out as a money problem, I'm going to end with a dollar sign. So go ahead and solve B and C. You're going to multiply just like you normally would, and then you're going to count 2 spaces for the decimal point. So don't forget that when you put that in your answer. So pause the video and do B and C right now, and then come back for the next section. So starting part 3, so all of these are statements that are comparing a letter to the number 1. So you're going to have to make number families that have a fraction for the difference, a fraction for the letter that you're given, and a fraction for the 1 whole. So remember that if the letter is less than 1, then the letter is going to be a small number. If the letter that you're given is more than 1, it's going to be a big number. So let's look at A together. So I know that I'm going to make a number family because I read that in the instructions. Make a number family. So I'm going to start out my arrow. And then I'm going to look back at the statement, and it says J is 1/7. And I know that 1 over 7 is less than 1, which means that I know that J is going to be a small number. These are difference problems, so I want to know the difference between J and 1, so that's my other small number is going to be a difference. And remember that we're comparing it to the number 1, so my big number I'm going to be calling 1. So they told us that J is 1/7, so I can put 1/7 as my fraction for J. I also know that I'm comparing it to 1, so I'm going to have a fraction for 1. When we're in a number family, all of the fractions have the same bottom number. And if I know that this is equal to 1, I'm going to make it 7/7. I know that my bottom number here has to be 7, and then I work the top just like a regular number family. So 7 minus 1 is 6. So I know that the difference between J and 1 is 6/7. All right? The same thing for B. Once you set it up as the number family, you have to ask yourself, is J more than 1 or less than 1? And I can see I have 8/7. 8/7 is more than 1, so this time J is going to be my big number, right? Because J is going to be 8/7. I know that it's more than 1, so it's going to be big. I'm still going to compare it to 1, and I'm still looking for the difference. So what you're going to do is you're going to fill in what is the fraction that should be equal to 1, and then to figure out the difference. So go ahead and set that up. Finish B and also do C and D. So pause the video while you work on that and then come back for the next section. So for part 4, they've given us mixed numbers. So it's a whole number with a fraction, I need to add them together. One thing that you'll notice is that they gave us the same denominators for all of the problems. So none of these fractions are going to have to change because the denominators are already matching. So what you're going to do is you just add the fractions first like you normally would, and then add the whole numbers as if you were just adding regular numbers. So if I'm going to start here, I'm going to start out with 5/9 plus 3/9. So I know that my answer is going to have 9ths as my denominator, my bottom number. And then I'm just going to add the top numbers. I have 5 plus 3, which is 8. So I know that this fraction part of my problem is already solved. I've added 5/9 and 3/9 and I've gotten 8/9. So now I'm just going to add the whole numbers like I normally would. So I've got 4 plus 1 is 5. And I know that 2 plus 1 is 3. So my answer I have is 35 and 8/9. I have my whole number and my fraction, 35 and 8/9. So you're going to do the same thing. You're going to add the fraction first and put it here, and then just add the whole numbers and put them out front. So go ahead and solve B and C. Pause the video and then come back when you're ready for the next section. All right, so for part 5, these are problems that are going to ask about the number of degrees in part of a circle or part of an angle. So remember when they say of, when we're trying to change this from words into symbols, of means times. So you also have to remember when you're doing these problems is that when they are just asking you for a circle, when they say a circle, they mean 360 degrees. That's how many degrees are in a full circle, right? When we have a full circle, we know that we're going around 360 degrees. So to set up A, they're asking us how many degrees are in 3/8 of a circle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to translate from the words. So our answer is that we have to answer is how many degrees, and this is what we're changing into the problem that we're solving. So I'm going to start with the number they give us is 3/8. And then it says of. And I know that anytime they say of, I'm going to multiply. And now they just say a circle, so I have to change that into numbers that I can work with. And I know that when they say a circle, I know that they mean 360 degrees. So when I'm multiplying, I have to include my hidden number 1. And also when I'm multiplying fractions, I do not have to change the bottom number because that only happens when you're adding or subtracting. So when you're multiplying, it's fine that they don't match. And I do it straight across the top. So when I multiply 3 times 360, I'm going to get 1,080. And when I multiply straight across the bottom, I just have 8 times 1, so I'm going to be 8. So I still can't leave it because I still haven't answered the question, how many degrees, because degrees should just be a regular whole number. Degrees cannot be left as a fraction. So I have to take it one step further, and you can use your calculator for this. I'm going to do 1080 divided by 8. So 1080 divided by 8 in your calculator, and it's going to be 135 degrees. All right, I'm going to set up B the same way, that I'm going to use the fraction that they gave us. Of means times, and when they say a circle, we know it's 360 degrees. When you're doing C and D, they're giving you a fraction, they're telling you to multiply, But you do not use 360 because here for C, they're asking for angle V. So I'm going to use the picture here, and I can see that angle V is 74. So instead of doing 360, I would be multiplying by the number 74. So be careful on that. So go ahead and finish solving the problems, B, C, and D. Make sure to ask for help if you're not sure. So pause the video and give them a try, and then come back for the next section. So for the next part, for part 6, I'm going to read what it says in the box, and you're going to follow along. So it says that you can show what an arrow digit is worth by replacing the digit with 0 and subtracting the number with 0 from the original number. So here's a number with the digit for 7,000 arrows. So you can see right here that the thousands place has an arrow there. But if I'm not sure, I'm like, okay, there's a 7, but I don't know how much that 7 is worth, you're going to replace that digit with 0. So now, instead of having a 7, I'm going to change it to a 0. And now you're going to subtract 50,328 from the original number. So here's the number that we started out with. Here's our new number with 0 in the thousands place. And I'm just going to do regular subtraction, and I get my answer is 7,000. So that's my answer when I'm asking you which one, how much is that number worth. Once you do the subtraction, you'll be able to tell me that that number in the thousands place is worth 7,000. So let's work one of the problems together. So part 7, we're going to practice with a type of problem that we just read about. So what I'm looking at here is that I have the hundreds place, ones, tens, hundreds, has an arrow. So I need to figure out what is the value of 6 when it's in that spot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down my original number. So I have 54,617. I haven't changed anything. And now, in order to figure out what it's worth, is I'm going to rewrite the same number, but the one that has the arrow there, I'm going to change that to 0. So this one doesn't change. But now, since this is the one that is the arrowed, I'm going to write it as a 0. And then the rest of the numbers don't change. So what I'm going to do is then I'm going to set it up as a subtraction problem. So I'm going to do 7 minus 7 is 0. I have 1 minus 1 is 0. Here I've got 6 minus 0 is 6. I have 4 minus 4 is 0. And I have 5 minus 5 is 0. So if I'm asking what is that digit worth that has the arrow, what the 6 is in that place, I know that it's worth 600. So you're going to do the same thing. You're going to set up the rest of the problems. So let's take a look at this one. So this has a 9 in this place. So I'm going to write my original number without anything changed. And then I'm going to subtract my new number where I change this one to a 0. So I'm going to do 704 because I've changed this arrowed number, the one here that had the arrow. This arrow number is going to become 0. I'm going to subtract 4 minus 4 is 0. 9 minus 0 is 9. Oops, sorry. 4 minus 4 is 0. And then 9 minus 0 is 9. And then 7 minus 7 is 0. So the value, how much that 9 is worth, is 90. So go ahead and finish to do C and D. Remember, put the original number on top, and then your new number is going to go on the bottom where your arrow digit is changed to 0. So give those a try. Ask for help if you need it. Pause the video and then come back for the next section. So the instructions for part 8 tell us to write each problem as a column problem. So what I can see right now is that I have this written side to side, but columns go up and down. So we want to rewrite this to be an up and down problem and then solve it just like we regularly would. So to start out, I have the number 3, and then I'm going to be subtracting 7/4. But what I already know is that I can't just subtract a whole number from a fraction. I'm going to have to do some changing. So underneath a whole number is my hidden number 1. And then I know now that I have 3 over 1 minus 7/4. But I can't subtract yet because my denominators don't match. So I have a 1 and I have a 4. So I can change the 1 into a 4 by multiplying 1 times 4. And whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So I'm going to write my new fraction next to it. I've got 3 times 4 is 12 over 4. And I'm going to subtract 7/4. Hasn't changed because it already had the denominator I wanted. So when I do my subtraction, my answer is going to have the same denominator all the way through. And I know that 12 minus 7 is 5. So I've got 5/4 as my answer. So this is the same thing we've done when we've done side to side, but now we just want to get used to seeing it as an up and down problem. Remember, when you're doing multiplication, you don't have to change the denominators. You should just leave them how they are. But for C, you will have to change the denominator just like we did here so that they match. So pause the video so you can work part 8 and then come back when you're ready for the next section. So for the last section of this lesson, you have to switch to your workbook. So go ahead and get your workbook out to 75 part 1. And you're going to figure out the area of triangles just like we learned how to do in the last lesson. And so remember that you're going to first think of rectangle area where we do base and height. And to find the area of a triangle is very much the same. It's area equals base times height. But because we're dealing with a triangle, I have to divide it by 2, and that's the only difference. I still do the base times height that I always do, except when it's a triangle, because it's only half the amount of what the regular rectangle would be, I divide it by 2. So if I'm looking at the first one, I have a base of 4, right? My line on the bottom goes to the number 4. So my base is going to be 4. And I'm going to multiply it by the height, and this is a little teeny tiny triangle, so my height only goes up to the number 1. So it's going to be 4 times 1, and because I'm using a triangle and not a rectangle, if I was a rectangle, I would just solve from here. But because it's a triangle and it's only half of a rectangle, I have to divide by 2. So when I'm going to solve this, I have 4 times 1, which is 4. Divided by 2, and I know that 4 divided by 2 is 2, and I always need my units, and because we're area, it has to be square, and this one is yards. All right, so this is it. This is the number 2. There we go. All right, 2 square yards. So remember, you're doing base times height, just like we do when it's a full rectangle. Just remember the extra step of dividing by 2, and don't forget your units. So go ahead and solve for the next 2 triangles. When you're all done with this section, this is the end of the lesson, so check in with a teacher so they can check your work and you know if you have any corrections that need to be made. Once you're done checking in with the teacher and you've made any corrections that you need to make, you can go ahead and get started on your homework, which is in the textbook for lesson 75.